Hello and welcome to another episode of Research Radio, a podcast of the Economic and Political Weekly. I'm Johan, and on today's episode, we have a three-way discussion on the theme of race, caste, and class. In her book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, Isabel Wilkerson looks to the Indian caste system to provide the vocabulary to expose the invisible substructure underlying race in America. Wilkerson draws comparisons between racism in America and caste in India in the way certain logics and practices such as purity and pollution and endogamy are used to establish one's status, access to resources, and humanity. In this episode, we have Professor Gopal Guru in conversation with Professor P. Thirumal and Professor R. Srivatsan discussing Isabella Wilkerson's book and the overlaps and exclusions between race, caste, and class. Now, let me introduce our guests. Professor P. Thirumal from the Department of Communications, University of Hyderabad, teaches courses relating to theoretical history of media with reference to modernity and also deep time. His research and writings focus on the cultural histories of Northeast India, including caste embodiment studies, specifically in relation to discriminatory practices of Dalit Bahujans in higher education institutions in India. Professor R. Srivatsan is a political theorist with specific interests in development, culture, welfare, and healthcare. His books include titles such as Seva, Savior, and the State, essays on caste politics, tribal welfare, and capitalist development, and History of Development Thought. He was co-editor of Medico Friend Circle Bulletin. His research interests are the processes of development in politics and government, in healthcare, visual culture, and in the past decade in religion. He is also an occasional translator of Telugu Dalit prose and poetry. And finally, we have our very own Professor Gopal Guru, editor of EPW, who will take over the proceedings for today. Over to you, Professor Guru.
Thank you, Joanna. I take this particular pleasure to invite both Professor Srivatsan and Professor Thirumal for discussion on a very important book by Isabella Wilkerson. Both the authors who have contributed to EPW on the issue that we are going to discuss during the. I would come back in the end on with my own observations. So I will invite our guests to make their reflections on the book and also outside the book. Both of you are making different points, but at some level also you converge. But I think it's better that Srivatsan starts and then and Thiru follows.
Shivats, go ahead.
Okay, is the order fine, both of you?
If you want me to, I can go ahead.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Srivatsan. Please go ahead, and then you can make initial remarks for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then Thiru will take over.
If I remember reading Isabel Wilkerson's book, it was almost a traumatic experience because the absolute force with which she was writing, and given my own social location as not belonging to a community which is discriminated against, you feel the pressure of writing actually acting. Felt that pressure acting on me directly. And it's a wonderfully researched book. I think pointing to the caste hierarchical dimension of racial oppression is again very useful. Uh, it's not simply the same as it was when it was proposed first in the 40s and 50s by Gunnar Myrdal and others. And in this repetition in the 21st century, she brings new insight to bear on the struggles against race and caste oppression. Now, in my view, because of a very immediate political agenda, a differentiation between caste as a hierarchical system of oppression and race, which we call the skin affair, is a little simplified. Race is more than a skin affair. It goes into anthropometry, eugenics till 1950s, and, for example, to study propensity towards certain diseases, medical effectiveness of drugs, and health prospects today. Caste is also more than purely hierarchical oppression that Wilkerson describes it as. It is also a form of knowledge. For example, the Castes and Tribes of India series, the Castes and Tribes of Bengal, the Castes and Tribes of Nizam Dominion, of the United Provinces, etc. And all these are how to understand better so that one administers better. Now, there is also another discriminative study of difference, which will be called ethnic, where the difference being studied is cultural and social, not physical or genetic. Both caste and race participate and spill into studies of ethnicity and culture. But all these, of course, constitute aspects of the domain of anthropology as a discipline. Ethnicity, of course, is also a source of hierarchical oppression and discrimination. Example, the oppression and discrimination against Muslims in India are of an ethnic nature. And it's also against Pakis in England, which is about both India and Pakistan. And if you take the example of the 19th century Pear soap ad, which I hope we can see later, where race and ethnicity flow together in one marvelous stream in the ad copy, and I quote, "The first step towards lightening the white man's burden is through teaching the virtues of cleanliness. Pear soap is a potent factor in brightening the dark corners of the earth as civilization advances. While among the culture of all nations, it holds the highest place. It is the ideal toilet soap." End quote. And tucked away at the right bottom side of the image is a hierarchical dimension of caste, as Wilkerson describes it, in the native crouching before the erect white man. Now, implicit in the idea of the white man's burden is the notion of the European master race, which gave it a right to rule and educate the world. Class differentiation, of course, is a later development in the history of oppression and exploitation. It is not necessarily discriminative of existing cultures, though it can be, but it produces a working class culture. And capitalism is a bit chameleon-like. It can work alongside slavery in the US, and it can work against the master race and the idea of for the idea of capitalist development in the third world after World War II. Now, both capitalist culture and liberal ideology work by promising freedom to everybody and the right to become rich and join the upper class. And of course, that's a dream, and most people actually exploit it in the name of that promise. And Marx has described wage labor often as, in ultimate effect, not too different from slavery. So there are obviously differences, but in terms of the sheer exploitation and oppression, it's not very different. Now, none of these categories are watertight compartments, and they bleed into each other. And if we think of our life as under a big circus tent or a canopy, there are four tent poles, and one of them is race, the other is caste, the third is ethnicity, and the fourth is class. And these tent poles are the force and knowledge supports that cover our existence today. I'm of course leaving the term gender out of here for the time being, but this leaving aside may be deeply symptomatic. But one cannot, however, miss the gender in the term master race or white man's burden. To me, race and ethnicity have the potential for becoming useful forms of thinking about the other once caste, oppression, and the hierarchical dimension is removed. Would it be possible to comprehend differences in genetics or in race without fear, oppression, and exploitation? To comprehend ethnic difference and diversity without torture or massacre? We don't know, but the possibility exists and would be useful, not only to celebrate differences, for example, through Padma Lakshmi's latest Nat Geo series, which is Taste the Nation, but also to know how one is more vulnerable than the other. Can you think of healthcare differently? These are possibilities one has to think about. And equality need not be identity. It is thinkable and doable that one has a Dalit or African American culture without being unequal to the white American or Brahminical culture. Thinking in this way always brings a breath of fresh air of freedom rather than the suffocation of trying to imitate the idiocies of the dominant culture. To be discriminating is the essence of the human, but there is the possibility that being discriminating and discriminative need not be discriminatory. And this possibility is not imaginative, it's very real already. But can it be separated from its seemingly conjoined twin of oppression, torture, and hatred is the question history has to answer. The problem of class, of course, cannot be solved by these moves. Thank you for inviting me to share my views here.
Thank you, Srivatsan, for your very precise and concise reflections on the topic. Yeah. Now, may I invite Professor Thirumal to offer his own comments on the subject. Thiru.
Thank you, Professor Gopal Guru. Uh, Here are my remarks on the book and also the theme. Um, Actually participated in a similar event at Anveshi along with Srivatsan and others on discussing this work. Uh, the agenda for today, as I understand, is to move beyond the usual connection that we build around caste, race, or race-caste relations, and how they are studied. I thought that was precisely the burden of Isabel's text. Uh, I would want to believe that the text wanted to uh, suggest the generative or the life giving power of caste in relation to the generative power of race across and within historical epochs. This has been sturdier, more solid in some sense. Now, I would like to understand uh, the terms of today's conversation as something that we need to move beyond disciplinary trajectories and look at colonial past as more of accidents, although this accident could be an extraordinary event that affected how we understood and experienced caste. I would think that is a dominant way of looking at caste, is something that that seems to be challenged by this particular text. Now, disciplines themselves are historically mediated rationalities, and they rarely capture the deeply sedimented residues of historical societies like ours, which have such a great temporal depth. Now, colonialism, an extraordinary event that affected caste and in a way also gave birth to race and also class. I'm not going to talk much about class as much as I'm going to connect race and caste. Um, but India has had extraordinary events like this before, and colonialism may be treated as an accident rather than an event that completely eroded the enduring reality and purchase of caste across and within epochs. If I can use a very outmoded word, essence, it did not really erode the essence of caste colonialism. And that seems to be a certain, I mean, it is suggested in the text, although it's not really, I mean, it doesn't work in the narrative. In the narrative, you don't find that, but it looks as if she's implying that. Now, as against that, race and class are more historical and therefore contingent truths. And this is something which is which seem to be which she seems to be suggesting, and which I would also think, or I would like to interpret her work as suggesting that race and class are more historical and therefore contingent truths. And one of the ways of saying that is the most significant feature of the shifts in ideas between the 16th and 19th centuries is that racism not only runs counter to the three major religious traditions which have dominated the West. It runs counter to the doctrines of man still being articulated within the 17th century, even the Enlightenment tradition to some extent. Now, as against that, caste is a more enduring truth. It's there for almost 3.5 millennia, and I would also like to add that Brahmins have existed as a historically continuous community for that very long period. In that sense, I would like to kind of recall what M.N. Srinivas actually implies when he makes a distinction between what he calls a temporality that is associated with the Sanskritization and the temporality that is associated with Brahminization. What he calls a Brahminization for him is associated with Vedic ritual past. Now, in that sense, whether you take the discursive intelligibility or the non-discursive comportment of the Brahmin culture, it's related to an authentic, not essentially Indian past, but also a very authentic Indic past. Hence, the historical anchor is on Indic rather than Indian or colonial pasts of media. And I'm not very sure if you have adequate tools to understand uh, the suggestion that he's making about an authentic temporality, that Brahmanization, the model for the Dvijas, or is the Vedic ritual or Attic past, whereas for the others it is the Sanskritization. That is not a authentic temporality. Now, I would see, not that Wilkerson has gone through all this, but this is the background through which Wilkerson is examining the relationship between caste and race. The ubiquity and the ever replenishing cultural authority of caste needs to be understood as necessary to providing a blueprint and roadmap for understanding race. Uh, the what she's trying to do is that she holds caste in a very primary relationship to race. And I also feel, I mean, this is looking at the continuous writing of Gopal Guru, Sundar Sarikar, and various others. Uh, there's there seems to be a certain way that uh, caste is not a very authentic subject for understanding India. It is something that that seems to be the burden of the dominant tradition, and the vitality of caste, which Guru and Sundar Sarukkai and a few others have been working, don't seem to be an interesting object of study. And here, the vitality seems to be a very important character, and that vitality would mean the vitality of caste, that is, the life generating capacity of caste, is much stronger than the life generating power of race or even class. And it is the promise of this book tends to be is about this kind of unraveling of the absurdity and a certain kind of you know we talk about thought, but I would like to make a distinction between to think about something and what makes us think about something. Now, what makes us think about something is more elaborate in caste, whereas it looks as if that is not so elaborate when it comes to race and class. This derivation, in that sense, I was arguing that the derivation of race from caste is not analogical, sociological, or historical, but it uses something called the metaphysical rationalism. Now, I understand metaphysical rationalism as something that allows us to look at causation as a connection between concept and inherence. In other words, caste is a primary concept and race is a historical expression or accident, and that concept produces effect, but in a more vitalistic sense, not in a logical sense. And the existential work on caste today that is being done by Guru and others seem to be about expressing this existentialist sense of caste, and I think that's a very important character that also seeps into her work. What attracted me most about Isabel's work was the way she conflated, these two terms. Now, uh, race is subsumed by caste, but not by way of spatial and historical containment, but more by a theory of causation, where the concept of caste inheres to the concept of race. Normally the understanding is how does something subsume. It should be either spatial or historical. It is neither spatial nor historical in that sense. And I would end this my brief presentation with a quote of Wilkerson, where she says, "A race in the United States is a visible agent of the unforeseen force of caste, caste is the bones, race the skin. Thank you.
Thank you, Thiru, for your very complex presentation. Uh, so, I would like to thank Thiru for implicating me into the discussion along with Sundar Sarukai. But we will keep that for another occasions. Uh, but I think both of you have done a wonderful job of actually bringing out very complex formulations that Isabel Wilkerson has done in her book. Uh, your pieces in EPW actually raise very fundamental issues about how to deal with the interrelationship between caste and race. And I don't want to summarize your arguments, so they are actually distinctly different. At some level, they also overlap. For example, the treatment that Isabel is giving to Brahmanism and Nazism and white supremacy and Nazism has been brought in by both of you. But there are interesting points Thiru, you are making in your write up that one is the divine epistemology of human mind, which is not fully explored in your piece, but that you can do later. And secondly, you also have done have made a reference to metaphysical rationalism. You have made some specific references to it in your deliberation today. But also there is some more need to really reflect on that. And so this is, but this, and your reading of the book, the style of the book is the performative force of the telling compels people to listen to. So there's a Levinasian sense, if you don't have ethics of listening, that book will compel you to listen to. As Srivatsan's confession in the beginning actually brought it forth. This is the power of the autobiographical narratives that are there in even Wilkinson's book as well. And you have a similar text in Marathi where you can really your autobiographical narratives actually bring a kind of a very performative force on somebody who refuses to listen to the narratives that are not the part of somebody's existential uh, uh, life. So we to that extent, I think Wilkinson's book actually goes beyond making connections with literature which is available in mother tongue, or if you want to use that term vernacular. I mean, I don't want to use the word term vernacular because it also belongs to colonialism. It's a colonial legacy. So we actually very purposefully, consciously avoid certain terminology. Now, Srivatsan's book, the write-up is very detailed, and he has brought in many important insights. But the important point that Srivatsan is making is in his write-up in EPW is that what is the basis of truth? What is how do we foreground truth? Truth through hermeneutics, truth with communication? No, truth is actually uh, can be accessed through narrative. So what Isabel is saying is that truth actually is there in what one is saying. Truth is there one what one is doing to the victim, for example, in this matter. So saying and doing are two important epistemic or ontological basis of truth. Basically ontological basis of truth. The language you use actually already carries the element of truth in it. So that is evident in that particular book by Isabel Wilkinson. So there are other points as well. Srivatsan hasn't really differed with her. He has differed with her in his write-up in EPW. Thiru doesn't really disagree with her, but this is my reading of your work, your piece in EPW. So I think let me make 2 points. One point is that if white is the problem and skin is the problem, ideologically understood skin is a problem. So can you really actually insulate, separate the being from the skin? Otherwise, that the white will always carry the burden of skin, and there will be no liberation of the white. And this is historically untrue. If you read the text by Du Bois and Ambedkar, you will always say that look here, Isabella has to actually go into the history of thought and find out the connections. This is the point number one. Point two is that the level of liberalism that is operative in our country and their country actually makes the accessibility possible. So to that extent also you will find that Isabella is much more forceful about America than India. And point three is that how does one really how does one understand the correct the privilege the how does one understand the category caste enjoying privilege of elaboration over race. This is by the very admission of the author, Wilkinson. Now, I think we just cannot understand two phenomena which already emerge in one historical particularity by actually pitting one against another as the more fundamental category. You require a more metaphysical language to understand the very authenticity of these categories exists in their historical social context. And therefore, I think forcibly taking them around the world in combination together would be actually protocol wise would be epistemologically unfair. So I think these 3 points we should discuss if you really want to discuss them. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make a comment. It's just to reiterate one of the points that I was making about the generative power, and that generative power, as Professor Guru was saying, cannot be reduced to some kind of a language of a conceptual language. It needs a metaphysical that the force of existence of caste, or the force of existence when it relates to class or race, that is the difference in which, and that force of existence has no way that we can comprehend within the usual disciplines that we currently have, and we need a language that that can capture this force of existence.
Yeah. Yeah. Srivatsan.
I would actually put together what Professor Guru and Professor Thirumal are saying and say that if I heard you rightly, the deadness of the notion of caste in the discussion in India is because it is so totally encased by institutional mechanisms and structures which make it almost inescapable. And what Wilkerson seems to be doing by talking across about caste, and the whole book is a metaphor about oppression in the US. Kwame Anthony Appiah says she's a master of extended metaphor, and he mentions the first chapter where he talks about the tundra ice, and from that the emergence of disease and all that. But the whole book, in her talking about caste, she's actually talking about how to rethink race in a different way. And it is the force of an autobiographical narrative and the skill of it's kind of Pulitzer Prize winning journalism. She's not a simple writer. She's right there at the top of the best journalistic writers and book writers and thinkers in the US. It's all these which actually break that deadening case hardening which is there in the Indian context. It may be useful to see that breaking of the genre and the undoubted skill with which she does it, which really is, to me, and that is of course built on her personal experience. It's that particular combination, that particular singular combination, which gives us this strength. So I just thought I'll make that comment about it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Srivatsan, that we are actually constructed ourselves into a there is a kind of a closure that we are imposed on ourselves, some kind of intellectual closure that we want to talk to people and we don't want to talk to people who don't want to listen to us. So there is a collective closure that we are imposed, and this is not the case in the US. That's why you can see the promise of black studies. uh, I am not very sure whether the uh, phenomena of black studies has already arrived, but Dalit studies has never arrived so far. We are just making rhetorical announcement that there is nothing Dalit studies, and I've been making this point for a very long time because we have not produced sufficiently the background conditions uh, that are necessary for uh, creating and expanding the social and intellectual base of what you are saying, which is not the case in the US. You just find the black people actually excelling in many fields, and you can see Anthony Appiah's huge intellectual career, and I'm happy that he has responded to Isabella Wilkerson's book. But we don't have that kind of a tradition, and we are actually we have, but we have a very weak traditions. We do not really share our own intellectual uh, thought. We do not share our even our weaknesses. We actually guard them against any kind of attack from outside. So I think this is a self-defeating exercise, and that's why the deadening of discussion actually has to do something with our unwillingness to really expand the frontiers of discussing. That's why I think the word Thiru has used is very important. What he says is that the force of existence of caste actually has to have some other conceptual vocabulary that is not at the moment available in the disciplinary discourses in India, and which is true. That's why I mean in our own work with I and Sundar have worked on, and so we are trying to say something which is which is different, if not new, from what is available in the social science humanities disciplines. So what we really require is the point that you're raising, Srivatsan, is this: that if Isabel is actually using caste as a metaphor, so we have to take a further step and say then find out how is metaphor used by her to actually explain and expand the conceptual force of the race and caste. And for that we require something else. We require to really put in the content in the elaboration of caste. How is caste elaborate not simply as a narrative or an empirical description, but actually if it is historical movement of race and caste as a category, it has to go through conceptually. The conceptual journey is unavoidable. So what are the resources that are available to actually make experience of caste and race into a conceptual category that can be then tightly organized into a form of a theory and take the whole thing around and then disturb people with this. So this is what is important, I think, and so I think it will open up ways to imagine Dalit studies and at least the Dalit studies. I think Black studies, of course, is on the verge of emergence.
Except to reiterate what both my senior colleagues have been saying, that there's a lack of vocabulary and lack of commitment to developing that vocabulary in the portals of academia way of working and in those institutions that we breathe and do our work. So that labor seems to be under. I mean, it's not a labor that's appreciated. It's a labor that's count very much. So I wish we were more open to it in the
Hmm.
coming days for the next generation.
I think we have no dearth of people actually writing about caste and race.
Yeah.
Actually, they are actually going for easy overlap.
Right.
at the international level. But it's
Right.
not that this is I mean, it's a oversimplified version of the intellectual relationship between the two. I mean,
Yeah.
that is much more attractive than doing a serious work. I mean, we don't
Right.
want to endure our the moment of argument. Arguments may not really come forward. They would not uh, be discernible immediately, and it will take long time for them to become discernible. But we are in such a great hurry
Yeah.
to make easy connections between the two. This is one trend. The other trend is
Yeah.
actually to see in every theme the relationship of caste and race. For environmentalism, caste and race;
Yeah. Yeah.
literature, caste and race. But this is something very very oversimplified. I mean,
Yeah.
you must give a very serious treatment to the
Right.
relationship between the two, and as you have done in your pieces in EPW, I think that's why I
Right.
think I took a great care while reading both of you in EPW pages. I think if you can really pick up something from there,
Yeah.
it will be a certain beginning, a sure beginning
Yeah.
of actually approaching, not simply. Superficially producing some kind of
Right.
overlap between the two for whatever reasons. I don't want to go into the reason as to why
Right.
people are
Right.
so
Right.
hyperactive on
Right.
taking. Uh,
Yeah.
so, what is that vocabulary, metaphysical level? What is that vocabulary that can really bring these two together
Right.
and in the mode of emancipation?
Right.
That's more important question that we have to raise.
Yeah. See, I think one of the problems also is that the academic and disciplinary discourses are reflective ones.
Hmm.
They reflect on experience. They are not experiential.
Hmm.
And there have been some writers, Sartre, for example, or Foucault, for example, uh, some other people who have really moved into this performative, semi-existential dimension of writing in the academia, in the manner in which they wrote. And the results they achieved have been stunning.
Hmm.
I think, I don't know, one has to figure out what we should copy that transformation. We should
Hmm.
figure out what the transformation required in our own reflective discourse to be able to handle this with the verve and strength it requires. And I'm just kind of repeating what you're saying, and that's the point.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you go to any bookshop in the US, you'll find racks of books written by the black scholars, and I think, and they are the result of the critical engagement with each other on the one hand, and critical engagement with others. I mean the white scholars on that, who are also who are also that very ethical ear to listen to you. So that's the advantage. Here we are actually sluggish in terms of we are starting, but we are sluggish in this.
Yeah.
That is melancholic part of it. Yeah.
Yes, sir. If I may add another prompt, we have spoken a lot about a problematic way of understanding the overlap between caste and race, but perhaps we have not spoken enough about class and how that features here. I was wondering if anyone would like to bring the class angle in.
Maybe Srivatsan can say something.
I had said a bit about class in the presentation. If you listen to it, you'll probably hear it. But see, class seems to be a much more recent phenomenon than caste or race, and it becomes a self-conscious category through the practices and from the practices, the theorization which Marx and Engels actually bring about in terms of class as making a dichotomy in the world between the ruling and the ruled classes, the oppressed and the oppressor classes. Now, it seems as if in general, the class structure is based on what's called a free market. But what Marx and Engels explain time and again is that the laborer enters the market free to sell labor power. But the moment that laborer enters the workplace, the laborer is a slave. there's a certain kind of almost wage slavery which is going on, and the extent of a extraction of life itself from the laborer is shown in the struggles to increase the working day and decrease the working day. So there's that dimension, that elasticity, and that dimension, and the empty promise of actually getting out of this wage slavery on the basis of which the whole system works. And that is suited to capitalism. So how actually they all work together, it's all very mobile. You can't say it's exactly the same. With race, it works one way, it works with race one way at one place, differently at another place. That's what I've seen. Capitalism is very, very, it's like a chameleon. It's very mobile. I would think. And so, how class cuts is something which is, you have to check in each case and see. There's no ready way of doing it. It's also very clear that everything you do about, caste or race or ethnicity or any of them is not going to solve the class problem immediately. That's another huge struggle altogether. That's what to repeat what I was saying.
Yeah, I thought I'd bring in another dimension of class, which is not the problem that Srivats is raising, but one of what happens to caste when you also a middle class. I'm working on a project of looking at the status of Dalit women, rural Dalit women in Telangana. And there is this instance of a Dalit woman complaining about an OBC, not complaining, lamenting that she holds a lower position in a small organization where they work, the OBC woman, but the OBC woman wouldn't eat in her house. They both are wage laborers. Actually, I mean, there's not much of a difference, and the kind of things that I haven't read many of these autobiographies of officials, Dalit officials who write, but all of them seem to have gone through a certain erosion of their self-esteem and self-worth in executing their task. And if arriving at a class would mean a certain erosion of your dignity, of your sense of worth, I was wondering what's the meaning of arriving at the class, and this is something that Isabel works very very well in a book. She goes to a boutique, and that fellow refuses to look at her. She wants to write about the boutique, and boutique owner says, "Well, I don't know who you are," and she shows her ID card, and says, "So what if you're working for New York Times? I don't want to talk to you." And she has to come out of that place, and it's on the face, and I'm sure it happens in a far more complex manner in our context. So what's the meaning of this middle class in terms of what do you discrimination is something that I find resonance in Isabel's work as well.
Yeah, I think since Joanna brought this category of class into the discussion, I think one has to reflect on this. We just can't escape it. I mean, now that the one of the criticism after the fall of Soviet Union was that, it is because, you people, Marxists, have really overtaxed the category of caste. Now, over a period of time, because of the nature of capitalism, you find that the category of class has actually lost its integrity and its concreteness, because the mode of production and the relationship have undergone a change. For example, this kind of capitalism has produced an informal sector, and that makes it exceedingly difficult to define class as an actually analytically integrated category. So you just can't really. It was possible earlier, but now it is difficult. So it is class, they say, has become a residual category because it doesn't really have the necessary definitional conditions that can really provide it a kind of a very coherent conceptual content. So that's the problem. But we will discuss that. Where has it disappeared completely out of is it is nowhere now, not
Yeah.
among the blacks even. So there is class among the blacks because there are people who are there is an internal differentiation. So can you really use
Exactly.
Marxist category to understand that? No, but there is another person, another scholar, another thinker whose name is Max Weber, and Max Weber would be much more relevant here to understand these new forms of. I mean, it has been there to understand class as the status group, and so that status actually is it cuts across the ethnic groups, caste, and race. So you will find a person, Thiru's example of Telangana women, the status wise, social status is different, therefore they can't belong to the same class. They belong to different class. So that is a major problem in our country to actually neatly precisely define what is class. And the debate has been very very rich in our country. Caste class. EPW actually carried so much with so much of force. In the early 80s and late 70s. So it is there, and I don't know. Can we really summon class as a major organizing category into our imagination? I
Yeah.
don't have any concrete answer at this point in time.
Yeah.
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 No, I must thank both the scholars for having accepted our invitation to share their views on this podcast. And I thank them for writing for EPW and also joining us in this podcast.
I must
Okay.
say, thank you for the privilege of joining this. It is a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Thirumal. Thank
Thank
you,
you, sir.
Professor Srivatsan, and
Thank
thank you,
you.
Professor Guru.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our listeners for joining us. And to see the image that Professor Srivatsan mentioned, head over to the show notes at epw.in/podcast, where you can also find other episodes of Research Radio. And to experience all that EPW has to offer, subscribe to EPW today. Bye bye, and see you next time.